In this video, we'll discuss leagues and league sizes. In particular, we're going to focus on how leagues are structured and how they choose the optimal size. We'll begin by asking what are open and closed leagues. Closed leagues are those that limit the teams to those that the owners have chosen to include. Changes in league size will need the approval of all of the owners. And we have examples across the United States in the form of the NFL, the NBA, the NHL, Major League Baseball, and Major League Soccer. In all cases, we see the role of owners in choosing league size when they allow leagues to relocate franchises or when they admit new teams. Open leagues, on the other hand, are where the set of teams that compete will change over time using a system of promotion and relegation. At the end of each season, the worst performing team or teams in a league are relegated to the next tier down, and one or more of the better performing teams from the lower tier are promoted to the tier above. Examples in this case include the English Premier League, the Bundesliga, and La Liga in European soccer. Why might one choose an open or a closed structure for designing a league? Closed leagues provide greater stability to team owners because they're not concerned about the risk of getting relegated over time, so they're much more stable. In a closed league, it's also more straightforward to implement a revenue sharing scheme since there's a small and well-defined group of teams that are involved. Closed structures also result in teams adopting or being more likely to adopt a profit maximizing structure. Open leagues, by contrast, can arise from a bottom-up system of local teams wanting to have structured competition between one another. In other words, tradition. In addition, the pyramid structure with promotion and relegation encourages teams to focus on maximizing wins since there's a risk of relegation if one does poorly and the potential upside of promotion if one does well. This effectively increases the marginal benefit of winning games relative to a closed league. We see the implication of these facts in the rules governing leagues, with some open leagues having very strict financial rules to ensure that teams aren't incurring losses on a regular basis. So teams in open leagues tend to focus on those points where total revenue equals total cost, rather than, as in the case of closed leagues and profit maximizing firms, trying to find points where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. In both types of leagues, there's a tension in choosing the number of teams to include. This is more salient in a closed league where the owners form a club or a cartel and choose who to include in their number. At the most extreme case, a league with only one team won't result in any competition, so clearly we need more than one team. Adding a team to a league does a few different things. First, it adds potential competition and increases the number of games the team will play. On the other hand, adding a new team may dilute fan interest in any one particular team. This is something that might worry the NFL since Los Angeles is now home to both the Rams and the Chargers. One important driver of league size, particularly in a closed league, is team revenue. And I'm going to focus in this video on the revenue from ticket sales. There are multiple other revenue sources as well, and the book does a great job discussing them. Here, we're going to focus on how team revenue depends on the number of games played. So without competitors, there are no games and no revenue. Additional competitor will lead to more games, but more games may also decrease revenue. Fans could choose to play against another team, and each game becomes less novel or less unique, so fans may be less willing to spend money on a ticket. And we see this phenomenon in ticket prices. The NFL, which features a 17-game season, has an average ticket price of $297. In the NBA and the NHL, both of which feature 82-game seasons, we see ticket prices between $146 and $165 on average. Contrast that with Major League Baseball, which has the longest season with 162 games and the lowest average ticket price of $79. These forces combine to create a downward sloping demand curve that we'll use as we think about the number of teams that there should be in a league. So to return to our original question of how many teams should there be in a league, we see that there's going to be a trade-off between the increase in revenue from playing more games associated with having more competitors, against a decrease in revenue from lower ticket prices because you have more games and therefore each game is less novel, and the increase in costs associated with having more games and/or more teams in the league. We can graph these data here on this graph, which plots the number of teams against the marginal revenue or marginal cost associated with that number of teams, and assume that leagues are going to think collectively about the marginal revenue and marginal cost impact of adding a team. So initially, teams will focus on the revenue impact of adding a team and choose the initial league size based on the intersection with marginal cost. But now suppose that something happens that shifts marginal revenue out from MR1 to MR2. In this case, the equilibrium number of teams will also shift, so the league will double in size from 4 to 8 teams. So as we think about the size of a league, one of the key determinants is going to be figuring out where that marginal revenue curve sits. So closed leagues ultimately are going to choose the number of teams oriented around maximizing profit. They're going to think about marginal revenue from the change in games and ticket price and compare that to the marginal cost from the need to play more games. Open leagues, on the other hand, are going to use a system of established rules to choose teams from a pool. They will still do much of the same marginal revenue, marginal cost analysis to think about how big a pool to use, but the teams in the top tier will change every year, so there will always be some churn in an open league.